This week we're talking about fine art printing with Mark Metternich and Robert Park, and you're listening to the Landscape Photography Podcast. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. I'm excited about today's episode because this one was a long one in the making. I think it was probably 5 months ago now that I first planned to record this episode with Mark Metternich and Robert Park from Nevada Art Printers. And we had so many technical difficulties the first time, it just never happened. And then I hit my busy season and we just never really made it happen. But I just got done with this conversation with Mark Metternich and Robert Park, and it was a really good one because there's a lot of good little nuggets in there. So Mark Metternich, we've had on the show before. You know him from his Sharpening for print videos and all of his educational videos. He's an excellent photographer. Robert Park, we've never had on the show before. He is the owner of Nevada Art Printers. It's a print lab out of Las Vegas, and he's best known for his Lumachrome prints. Everybody that I've ever talked to that has ordered a Lumachrome just raves about how beautiful those prints are. Both Robert and Mark teach printmaking workshops. They know a thing or two on the subject. So I'm excited about this particular episode because it's something that I really don't know enough about. Before we jump in, I want to let you know that I have a couple spots left in my 2019 Icelandic winter adventure. I think we have like 2 spots left. That's the only workshop of the entire year that I have any space on. So if you're interested in going to Iceland in the wintertime with Thor and myself, you can find that information over at nickpagephotography.com. Okay, let's jump into the conversation that I had with Robert and Mark about master printmaking. All right, so I'm sitting down with Robert Park from Nevada Art Printers and Mark Metternich. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Yes, thanks for having me here.
This podcast has been, like 3 months in the making, 4 months in the making?
Least.
Yeah, we tried to do this earlier. I guess it was summertime when we tried to do it, and we had so many technical difficulties it just didn't happen. And then I got really busy, and so now there's snow on the ground when we're recording it. So yeah,
that's awesome,
but, you know, we've had time to meditate on this particular topic, right?
Oh,
sure.
And better late than never.
Absolutely.
This time of year for me is all I'm doing because I'm not traveling right now. I'm just doing this.
Nice. Well, you know, those Florida winters are pretty brutal.
Yeah, we're around 70 right now.
We're feeling sorry for you up here in Pacific Northwest Wintergeddon that we got going on right now. All right. So when it comes to talking about printmaking, you guys are the first 2 people that come to mind, just because Robert, everybody that has ever ordered a print from that I've talked to that has ever ordered a print from Nevada Art Printers just raves about how awesome Lumachrome prints are. So I'm excited to have you on. And Mark, obviously you talk about it and you teach it. So you guys are the perfect pair to have on. Robert, maybe talk a little bit about Nevada Art Printers. How long you been doing that gig?
We have been doing it since 2010, and it was related to a gallery that we launched with Art Wolf and Robert Rotella, two partners. That we had a gallery in Palazzo, and we built the lab here. So I migrated from Utah, where I did a similar gig. But we just took it to another level when we came here to Las Vegas so we could compete on the Strip.
Awesome. When I think about Nevada Art Printers, everybody talks about your Lumachrome prints. So maybe you can kind of explain what exactly a Lumachrome print is.
Well, the Lumachrome print, it's not just a paper. The paper is unique for us. There's nobody else using it, but it's much more than that. The way we look at it, we have the paper, which is it's a multi-layer paper. It has a gelatin coating with a metallized mylar film.
Don't give too much away.
Okay.
Be careful. Be careful.
There's people listening. They're taking notes right now.
I just heard a bunch of Chinese print labs like pull out their notepads.
Copy.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a multi-layer paper that, because of the construction of the paper, it allows us to get the max out of a pigment ink. It gives the luminance and vibrance that like Fujiflex had, but it greatly surpasses Fujiflex in color gamut and print permanence. It also has the proper surface to allow us to face mount to acrylic. So that's the base, but it's the whole process. We make the ICC profiles and we hand edit the profiles to give a tone curve, so it gives the proper luminance, because these are reactive prints. Reactive meaning the amount of light that you put on it's going to react differently. It has that highly reflective mirrored look to it. So you need to account for that somewhat in your ICC profile and in your printing software. So it's linear. Anybody that's ever worked with something like Fujiflex knows that it looks radically different under different kinds of light, and it's hard to control highlights and so forth. We worked pretty hard on that to get our ICC profile and our tone curve just right, so it translates to what people are looking for.
That's awesome. And so, Mark, you pretty much exclusively print on Lumachrome stuff, right?
Yeah, it's my religion. To give you a little background, but I've known Robert for a long time. I think he started seeing my thirst for knowledge on a forum and started feeding it a long time ago, probably 2005 or something. I don't know. We stayed in touch over the years, and he could tell I was like a total nerd wanting to learn everything about everything. So he'd send me these little messages like, you might want to read this book, you might want to read this, and they'd be these huge thick books. Anyway, I was going down to the Southwest some years back, about when his print lab and Lumachrome was brand new, and he sent me a little message and he said, there's something better than Fujiflex. I think I might have emailed him BS, and that's all I said or something. And he said, well, when you're done with your Southwest workshops, if you could come by Vegas, why don't you just drop by? And I was like, okay. So I did. And, all he did was I came in, talked to him for a while, and then, he does this to a lot of people, but he had me come out and he showed me samples all over the place, on walls, on tables and everything, but he didn't tell me anything about what I was looking at. I'd look and I'd say, was that Fujiflex or is that Lumachrome? And he just would sit there and look at me and not say a thing. But as I was looking, I was like, what the heck is that right there? I had made tens and tens of thousands of dollars worth of Fujiflex prints mounted to acrylic for gallery photographers under confidentiality agreements when I lived in Vegas and such. And so I absolutely, that's the only thing I would print on at that time. But when I saw this other paper, I was like, I did not believe it. I just like, how could something beat Fujiflex? It's 3-dimensional. It's just like, so rich, it looks like you're looking into the photo. But I was looking at something and there was a massively obvious difference between especially that 3-dimensionality was the first thing that struck me. And so I was like, well, what is it? And then that's how I got into using it and telling people about it. And when it came out till today, I still haven't seen anything come close. So it's
cool. Yeah, I still have never printed on the stuff, Robert. So we have to remedy that in the near future. I actually have to come down to Vegas in about a month. So maybe we can set something up.
When you have something that could be incredibly, potentially better, you also have to know how to prep it to get the most out of it. If you give it an inferior file to a superior paper, you're still going to get kind of an inferior look. So what we're trying to do, and what Robert absolutely does when people give him the files, is learning how to prep these to their most, so that you're making use of that better detail, more 3-dimensionality, contrast ratio and stuff.
So I just heard everybody that was listening perk up when you said inferior file, because I know that everybody listening wants to know, well, what exactly does that mean? What is an inferior file? So Robert, when people are sending you files to be printed, what are some of the guidelines, first of all, that you recommend that people do to their files before they send them over?
Well, as far as file submission, I ask clients to send their file as a TIFF 16-bit. And if they've done any output sharpening, that on a duplicated base layer and sharpen that duplicated base layer so we can dial it out if we need, and also to let us do the upsizing, because
Okay.
right now we have 4 different algorithms that and methods that we can utilize to upsize something, and they all have different attributes that are better for certain kinds of images.
Okay.
And it really depends on what the image content is, the ISO that it was shot at, which results in a noise profile of the image. There's some of the processing that they might have done. Their monitor may not be correct at the correct luminance for their environment. So there's a lot of things, but basically, as a basic start, TIFF 16-bit sharpening on a duplicated layer, no upsizing.
So the TIFF file, is that just for that duplicated sharpening layer? Is that why you want a TIFF file over a super high quality JPEG for the layers?
There's much more to it than that, and if anyone's really serious about getting a great image, they should not be sending a JPEG. But a lot of people, they just have a JPEG, so we work with it. But the JPEG doesn't give us as robust of a file if we need to make edits to it, or if we want to sharpen it or lighten it. The fidelity is just not quite as good. And if someone's in Lightroom, the gold standard, the absolute gold standard, is to export a DNG from Lightroom if you've only used the Lightroom.
That's excellent information, because I've always heard that, there's not really a difference between JPEG and TIFF, but what you're saying is that there's definitely a difference, especially if you're going to do any edits after the fact.
Yeah, if you're going to do anything to it after the fact, there is a definite improvement. Now, a fully finished file that has everything absolutely perfected for output and the output sharpening for that particular size that you're targeting, the difference between the high quality JPEG and the TIFF isn't as great, but you can't go back and edit that JPEG and have as much fidelity or as robustness as you can if you have the TIFF, especially the 16-bit TIFF.
Yeah. Another thing that, always comes up when people begin to print their work, especially for the first time, is, just how much darker prints come out typically than the monitor that they're looking at. One of the questions that came in on the Facebook group is, assuming that you're operating on a calibrated monitor, are people that are doing prints and coming away with good results looking at that histogram, and is that giving them an idea of where those tones are going to fall on the print, or is that histogram more for displaying on a screen or on the web?
Well, let me ask you this. If you're looking at an image, do you look at just the histogram and never look at the image itself?
Good question. I always look at the image, not the histogram, typically.
So that sort of answers that, but that's a pretty complicated, or that gets into a somewhat complicated situation. There are particular ways to set up an edit for web and particular ways to set up an edit for print. And there's a very specific way to set the luminance of your display.
And they're quite different, and a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we go into a lot of that when we do the workshop, and to most people it's like a bright light goes on and suddenly things become clearer.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So we should mention at this point that you guys are leading printmaking workshops. You guys have one coming up this year?
Yeah, the ultimate fine art printmaking workshop. It's March 30th, 31st of 2019 coming up. We have, I think, maybe like 1 or 2 more openings. Then we have one on my website that I haven't told Robert about yet, I don't think, on March 28th to 29th of 2020, which is booking up.
Well, thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, better mark that on your calendar, Robert.
I think I sent you a message. I said, if you have any problems with the dates, let me know. But I will say that we are telling people that this is the best workshop in the industry in terms of it's the most comprehensive and cutting edge fine art printmaking workshop, from in-camera capture all the way to a mastered print of any type. And then people can scale back that information if they have production needs and they can't spend, half a day on an image or something like that. So, but we're giving them the ultimate, and they can pull a few things out of it. Even the basic beginners that have taken the class have told me it's been awesome, even though quite a bit of it went over their head. But we also give them the videos for review, so they get all of the teaching afterwards.
Cool.
But some of it's also NDA, non-disclosure agreement, because we are teaching some proprietary stuff that's absolutely, original to Robert pioneering or myself.
That's one of the challenges of, talking about print labs and printmaking and stuff, is that it's a highly competitive market and you can't really talk too much about your product. Otherwise, people will just go out and recreate it, So that's got to be a challenge as well.
It's going to be, I think, as time goes by, more and more people are going to know, and they're going to tell their friends and such.
Yeah. So another question that comes in pretty often is the talk about 4 and 5K monitors and why sometimes those are not ideal for when you're dialing in the sharpening. Especially, I know when I've got a 2.7K monitor because I didn't want a 4K because. Good. If you're sharpening a print or sharpening a file that's going to go on the web, when you resize it and then sharpen it, you're looking at like basically a thumbnail of what it looks like on your screen. So maybe talk about what monitors you guys prefer when you're editing something for print.
Robert's great at describing this. I keep it in real simple terms. It's pixel density. You can't see 300 pixels per inch on a print, so we have problems with being able to actually evaluate critically the noise profile, how much noise is in the image, and how sharp that image is. You just can't see it. And then the viewing distances that you are kind of seeing it are not ideal, and they're not as good as the lower than 4K monitors. And so if you're a serious printmaker, you want to keep or acquire a older monitor, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it is, a bit contradictory to what you would think would be the best. You would think that more pixels, more DPI, more resolution, it's better. It's going to be much more like the print. But in reality, it's not. And where the real problems come in is when you want to upsize images also, because when you're upsizing anything above the native resolution, little tiny things become much larger things. Something that might have been crushed down on the 4K display or 5K display, and you think is going to be fine for your 16 by 20, suddenly becomes like a giant, speck of pepper or sand in a bigger print, and it isn't good. What it really relates to is the pixel radius or the pixel size. The best pixel sizes for judging at 100% zoom is a 0.22 to a 0.25 pixel radius. That roughly equates to, on the 0.22 side, a 27-inch QHD, which is the 2560 by 1600 monitor, or a 30-inch QHD, which it gives you the 0.25.
Otherwise, you just can't really see deep enough into a photo.
You really can't see what's going on the pixel level. And with the 4K and the 5K displays, especially with the Apple system, the Apple's doing some they're calling it smart, to make it a better user experience. But they're playing with some things. And on the 4K, it's at 100%. It's so small, you really can't see if you're starting to create a little bit of noise or grain or edge. And if you zoom in to 200%, that 200% is an interpolated amount, because it's not really an accurate representation of the single pixels. Maybe when they get to an 8K display, you may be able to use the proper amount of pixel doubling to get a better representation out of it, but they haven't done that yet. And the other problem is that most people don't know that if you're on a 4K or one of the laptops with the Retina display, which is an even smaller pixel, which makes things even worse, is that people don't know to open Photoshop in high res mode. That they're opening it in a standard mode, so text is visible, and it's an even greater interpolated representation of what's going on.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's kind of like if you're viewing an image in Photoshop at like, 66% or whatever, you can tell that you're seeing that interpolated kind of guess of what the image looks like because you start getting, banding and smooth gradients and stuff like that. But when you zoom into 100%, all of that banding and all of those weird artifacts go away because you're no longer looking at an interpolation. You're actually looking at how it actually looks. So I'm guessing that goes the other way. Once you zoom past 100%, you start going into 200%. It's starting to guess again. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, there's some smoothing going on, in order to spread the pixel, out across 4 pixels or 2 pixels, depending on, how far you've zoomed in. Since the pixels are so small and to the naked eye on like a retina, you can be sharpening and sharpening and sharpening, and you're really not seeing anything. Like a lot of people will sharpen at 50% for print. You're not really seeing anything, and it's just because it's so small, and it's blurred by your eyes and the size of the pixels and the acuity that you can get. So you wind up over sharpening your images, usually massively. Where the real problem comes in is that if you've over sharpened in the raw stage, you've locked that in and you've basically handicapped your file for life.
And that's one of the things that I noticed, even when I went from like, a standard HD monitor to my 2.7K, is that suddenly, the same sharpening techniques that I was doing before don't seem like they do nearly as much anymore, and then I go to my laptop and then it's like, totally different still. I definitely see a need for there to be some kind of, standard, like, this is the monitor that I check all of my print work on because this is what I can know and what I trust.
Yeah. Now, there's an interesting thing is that the companies that are making the displays like, ISO and NEC, they still offer those displays with 0.25 or 0.22 pixel radius. And one of the displays that we recommend is actually called the photographer's monitor. And it's that QHD. It's not a 4K. It's the 2560 resolution. And they call it the photographer's monitor.
Do you recommend like wide gamut displays, or do you recommend just brain fart,
like an sRGB?
or do you just recommend sRGB monitors?
Well, the interesting thing is that the displays that are the panels, I should say, the panels that are falling into the category that we're recommending here are all wide gamut panels. So if you're going to go out and get one of the better panels to do this, they're going to be wide gamut.
And also, we're talking about print. So when you were saying, I should have like one display that's going to be the most accurate, but it's almost like you got to kind of like, well, okay, what are most of the web people, people looking at your website and stuff or Instagram, what are they going to be seeing? But then when you go to a print, how can you see the absolute best possible closeness to what a print will look like? And that would be like a separate workflow or separate thing for a person to be thinking about. I have an sRGB Mac Thunderbolt 27-inch that I have grown to really like because I know that my images are going to be viewed through a lot of Macs. Most of my workshop clients and such, maybe 60, 70% of them, maybe even higher, have a Mac. So I do want to see what my image looks like through a Mac or a MacBook or iPad or iPhone or whatever. But one of the questions that a lot of people ask during our workshop is, can I actually process an image on an sRGB monitor and make a wide gamut print? I do. And what I do is I work on a specially calibrated sRGB, Thunderbolt. This is one of the lower than 4K monitors. That's why I've kept it. And I just like the way that it views detail. It's not my main monitor. I have a wide gamut print monitor right next to me as well, but I just like this one. So I use it, but here's a couple things I do. If I'm working in a wide color space like Beta RGB or Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB or whatever, I make sure that I'm not clipping either tones, but also I turn on the gamut warning so that I'm not clipping colors. And I don't push the saturation all the way when I'm on that. And if it's a real critical print for a client, somebody's hired me and they want to 60-inch perfect masterpiece or whatever, and I'm constantly doing these, I'll work up to a point on this monitor, and then I go over to my below 4K. I have a Dell Ultra Sharp, and that's the wide gamut, and it'll look different. The contrast ratio will look different. You know, how dark black is, how white is. The colors will be more saturated and maybe a little bit different, calibrated to the exact same print specs. And then I kind of do that last 10% of fine tuning it to perfection. And then, you know, I send it in. So a person can use a sRGB monitor, but one of the things that people don't think about is gamut has a lot to do also, not only a lot more color variation, but also how saturated things can be. So you could be like pushing, you can't quite get that saturation level. It's just because the monitor won't show it to you, but it's in the file.
Yeah.
So there's a simple little thing a lot of people don't know about in Photoshop, and it's gamut warning. And you can choose, hey, you know, Adobe RGB or the Lumachrome ICC profile, or you can choose, you know, ProPhoto RGB or whatever, sRGB, and you can click on it. And when you do that, it will show you when colors in your photo start going outside that space. You've exceeded the saturation, or you've exceeded the gamut in those areas. So you can work very carefully and not clip those colors in those areas. And that's really smart to do, especially if you're on an sRGB monitor. But if you want to do everything yourself, it is, you know, extremely important to get that print-oriented monitor. And one of the big pluses to that is these are older monitors usually, and you can get them for, you know, under $1,000, maybe $400, $500, and, you know, it's not that expensive.
One of the things that you were mentioning, Mark, is how when you're working in a wider gamut, you notice that it doesn't just affect the amount of color, but it also has a perceived saturation difference. And that's one of the things I really noticed when I switched over to this BenQ wide gamut monitor that I have now, is that everything just looks so much more saturated. It's kind of interesting to work on because you end up not pushing saturation quite as hard as you do on an sRGB monitor, it seems like.
Yeah, and when you post your work on a forum and they say, oh, that's so oversaturated, and you're like, no, it isn't. You know, I'm not pushing saturation. Well, maybe you're on an sRGB monitor and they're seeing the full gamut. You know, so it's funny how these devices, you know, are unless we're all working really hard to try to get them to communicate to each other as accurate as possible. It's a crapshoot.
Well, and one of the weird things is that, like, when you calibrate your monitor, it doesn't affect every single program equally. Like, I noticed that, you know, one web browser will be calibrated to what I calibrated my machine to, but another one won't be.
Yeah.
And so, like, you'll have, you know, stuff heavily saturated in Firefox, but everything looks fine in Chrome or whatever. That's one of the things that I've found.
Yeah, and there is in the preferences of Firefox, you can go in and set that to recognize or to adhere to embedded ICC profiles or non-embedded ICC profiles. Because what that is if you don't embed the sRGB profile when you prep something for the web, it's an untagged file. And if you have a narrow gamut, an sRGB gamut monitor, well, it's only going to display colors as wide as sRGB. And if you have the wide gamut one and it's an untagged file, it will, you know, it'll display the most saturated colors at the maximum saturation of that display, which is usually not correct. But you can tell it to assign files that don't have an ICC profile tag to it to just to use sRGB for those. And that's in the preferences of Firefox, and it's something that happens a lot.
I think that alone is worth the cost of this podcast right here, because that's going to change my life. Because I'm so tired of looking at oversaturated crap on some of my browsers. I can't remember which browser is the oversaturated one, but one of them, I can't trust anything that I'm looking at because it's just wrong.
I used to use Firefox, and then now I use Chrome, but it's the what is it? Something Explorer. I haven't used it for so long. That one, unless they've changed things, from my understanding, from what people told me, was it wasn't recognizing the embedded profile in the JPEGs, and so it was sort of interpreting them however it thought, was correct. So I quit using that one.
So another question that often comes up when people are talking about printmaking is, how big can I print this? It varies from sensor to sensor and file to file. Do you guys have any kind of rule of thumb as to how large a file can be printed given how many megapixels the file is?
Well, that's all changing very quickly on us, right, Robert?
Yeah, that there's some things that are in flux with that. You know, some of these techniques that we're using now that can have a profound effect on how big that is. But in general, if you haven't shot something at a high ISO, we can generally go bigger than what you might have thought. And if something's really clean, like at base ISO or at the pulled ISO, like the low 1 or low 2, ISO 32 on the Nikons.
And that he means ISO expansion. That's my language.
Yes, ISO expansion. That's my religion. You can get, we can get a 60 by 90 out of a well exposed sharp D850 image.
Nice. Yep. And that just has to do with, like, you know, the algorithms that you're using for resizing.
Yeah, the different which algorithms, which sharpening routines we use, as long as it's not been over sharpened in the capture.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into that in terms of maximizing not only the sharpness but the quality of the detail in an enlargement if a person wants to put a lot of effort into it. But it does, it has to. He said sharpening routines or whatever. But there's, you know, capture sharpening. There's sharpening for output. There's interpolation or upsizing choices. There's grain simulation. There's a whole lot to that.
So, Robert, if somebody's going to send you a file, do you recommend that they be fairly conservative with the amount of sharpening that they're applying? Because I'm assuming that when you use your algorithms and you resize it, you know, you upsize it, that you're going to end up adding a little bit of sharpness again after you resize. Is that safe to assume?
Yes, less is more with regards to the sharpening that you've done, especially with the number of people that are using Retina displays and 4K monitors. Mm-hmm. And the algorithms, almost all, and some of them are really horrendous as to how soft the enlargement is after you've upsized it.
Yes.
But you know, sometimes we want to use that. You know, there's situations where we want the softer algorithm. So it's, you know, there's a lot of craftsmanship that goes into determining, you know, or bringing together all those different things. Yeah. But less is definitely more, and the smallest radius with a conservative amount of sharpening with the Adobe products is definitely better.
Okay. I would definitely agree that even the stuff that you see online, people tend to over sharpen like everything. But if you look at Mark's photography, you push sharpening like to the limits, but you're also very thoughtful about how you're sharpening. You're not just, you know, applying sharpening globally to like every single pixel equally. I imagine that you have a bunch of tricks that you're doing for your sharpening techniques.
I separate web from print. When I do print, you know, people hire me. Well, you know, I make my own prints here and there, but mostly I'm hired to make, you know, masterful images to the highest quality that I can for them. And so they send them to me, and that's a whole different sharpening protocol and approach. It doesn't even resemble for web. So,
like, can you talk about some of the fundamental ways that sharpening for web is different than sharpening for print? Like, just, you know, view from 1,000 feet. Like, what are some of the big differences?
If you just want a really nice looking web image that will suffice, I mean, you actually could just get away with using something like Photoshop Smart Sharpen. You know, just sharpen it with like he said, a low radius, high amount, and maybe use the lens blur, which is the more of a almost like a deconvolution, real fine sharpening. And you could use that noise slider and kind of slide it out till you don't see it so much in your sky and whatever, and you could call it a day. And most people are just in a hurry. They don't want to sit there. And a few of us, you know, photographers like you, Nick, or whatever, professionals or people who are, you know, really trying to push the limits, or we may sharpen in a bunch of layers and brush in a little bit here and there to, you know, emphasize certain areas and erase it out of the smooth surfaces, stuff like that. But web sharpening is very simple. I mean, you can get away with just doing like something real simple. So it depends for me. If I'm really in that mood where this image I just want as best as possible for web representation, I definitely sharpen in multi-layers. I'd use the size down technique that Mark Adamus pioneered, that where it's a finer sharpening than any algorithm can do, but it's built into a lot of different third-party softwares now, and people don't know it. And then I just brush in and brush out where I want it, to mask in, mask out. But when it comes to print, that is a whole other beast. I mean, you have to be, again, I got to kind of like, if you're just going to send something in, make a metal print, you just want to sharpen it, and you don't have a lab like Robert's, which I don't even know a lab where, hey, we'll do the sharpening for you. We'll double check and set it in layers and we'll fix it or whatever. That's, for the most part, people don't have labs like that. So they have to send it in. I have to differentiate if you want a good print or, a pretty excellent print, or if you want a incredible print that just blows people's minds. Those are different workflows, but they really come down to the basics of capture sharpening or pre-sharpening your image. And we, like Robert said, we don't advise doing that raw anymore, because if people accidentally overdo it, then they make it a TIFF and then they work in Photoshop, it's locked in. So doing it in Photoshop as a layer and using the camera raw filter is one way to do it. And you can access the detail tab there, and getting that capture sharpening just into the really, best detailed areas of the image, underdoing, making sure you're at 100% viewing distance and on the right monitor, and then using the best interpolation methods to size up. And that's a whole controversial subject, and there's some new awesome things that are going on there. And then you have output sharpening. That's just your sort of general sharpening of your print, because it's usually softened substantially once you've sized it up. High pass, if I had to just like pick one thing, high pass is a really good way to sharpen, because it kind of drops off your lower frequencies. That's your smoother surfaces, and it really attacks the micro detail and the other kinds of frequencies a little bit better. And then maybe a grain simulation, which just creates a little bit more of an enhancement of the quality of the detail. That would be kind of a simplistic explanation of kind of the approach for print. But the main deal for print is really learning how to mask and get the right things at the right amount and the right type into the right places, and really knowing that you're seeing the right thing on your monitor, and then bringing it up to the size that you want to do, and then finding that type of sharpening that's going to bring out the very best quality of the detail in the areas you want it, but not in the other areas. So you can have depth of field issues where something's sharp, something's blurry. You can have smooth water and clouds, but then you have, sandstone that needs to be really tight and fine detail. So it's learning how to sort of like evaluate and get it where you want it. And on top of all that, there's a lot of new, super crazy, cool, innovative, pioneering, and even proprietary techniques coming out now that's really allowing us to make, 8-foot prints, 9-foot prints, 6-foot prints out of things that we never, ever thought we could at a quality level that we'd never thought was possible.
Yeah, and you're talking about some of the resizing techniques that you guys are using for different algorithms to blow stuff up.
It's the whole thing. It's like he was talking about the pulled ISO or low ISO. If you have a clean file, you've exposed it far to the right, you've brought it down, and before you even turned on the color noise reduction in RAW, there really wasn't any. What you're going to have is an image that doesn't have a graininess to it. I call it an incongruity of pixels. And when you don't have that graininess, that image can handle quite a bit more pre-sharpening without any artifacting. So now it's almost like you shot it with a super lens, before you sized it up. And that's, again, less is more. But then when you size it up, it also can handle a lot more stuff, more sharpening. Far more than if you have an image that's got a lot of noise, even if it's been taken out and raw. But that noise profile, we call it, how much noise that image originally had plays massively into an image's overall potential for enlargement.
Right. When you have a noisy image, when you go to sharpen, it's going to find all of that noise and sharpen the noise because that is the detail. But if you have a shot that is incredibly clean noise wise, when you go to add that sharpening, it's actually sharpening details rather than just noise. And that's why printmakers like yourselves, you're lovers of low ISO, because that's a little bit further that you can push the sharpness. And the further you push the sharpness, the more detailed and beautiful that print becomes.
Yeah, and there's less noise too.
Yeah.
If you shoot it at the pulled ISO, the expanded low ISO, you don't have to use any noise reduction. So you're getting more sharpness that way. You don't have to use color or luminance noise reduction. All of your edits are going to have less of an impact on the image. It's going to raise less grain and artifacting. It's basically it's like the holy grail, but everybody's been ignoring it.
It's because when you're posting stuff to the web, nobody can tell whether it was shot at ISO 100 or ISO 3200 because they're seeing a tiny little photo. When you're looking at a giant print of something, stuff like that begins to matter again. And people just aren't printing as much as they used to. And for that reason, people are getting a little bit lazier when it comes to noise and stuff, because sadly, for the majority of people, it doesn't really matter that much. Instagram has made us lazy.
Yeah. And the metal print also it totally lacks the capability to have, that ultimate level of detail holding and sharpness. So, some noise and grain, it will just be blurred out by the metal print versus any other print types, first generation print types versus, a second or third generation metal print.
Gotcha. Okay. So that is an interesting subject right there. So you're saying that metal prints, generally speaking, just don't have the detail capabilities that other prints do. Robert, what is I think I know the answer to this already, but what is your preferred print medium?
Did you have to ask?
I've never asked him that question.
Yeah, it's obviously, well, for the high gloss landscape images, it's without a doubt the Lumachrome. I do have some other medias that I really like, and they're very somewhat image specific. For paper prints, I really like the gold fiber silk, and I like the Hana Mule Photorag Baryta.
And gold fiber silk, that sounds so expensive. That's just,
doesn't it?
Yeah, that's hanging on the wall of some czar somewhere.
Certainly, yes, and I'll have a scotch with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so and they have a very specific way of looking, especially for black and whites. There's a richness that they have, and they that traditional, and if you've ever seen an actual Ansel Adams, a darkroom black and white print with those deep blacks and the richness of tonality and so forth, and those are all on fiber-based papers. None of these RC papers. Those papers give that look, especially the gold fiber silk, because it has the white point that's similar to those.
I just want to say though, it surprised the heck out of me how beautiful black and whites are on Lumachrome, because I previously would not make a black and white on a Fuji Flex, but those black and whites have such a rich sharpness. It's amazing to me. And if you put the non-glare, acrylic on there, that crazy new stuff, it's to me, it's an amazing presentation of a black and white. And I would never say that before up until Lumachrome. So
yeah, it's a very rich black. It's beautiful. The P99 looks fantastic with that, and it's a similar surface to what like a 4K HD TV has for the acrylic, the non-glare, and it's a very beautiful look. It's a sensuous look.
Sensuous.
Well,
we're photographers. This is all sensuous.
Tell me more, Robert. Jeez.
This is guy talk.
All right, so let's end this with Robert, as many prints or as many files as you get sent for your print lab, what are like the top mistakes that you see people make over and over and over when they send you files?
I would say that the top mistake is an improperly set up display.
Yeah.
Meaning they've just chosen whatever the recommended luminance was. They've calibrated their display, and it was at the recommended whatever 120, and it's just not right for their environment, because the brightness of your display needs to be matching to the brightness of your work environment. If you were in a pitch black room and your monitor would seem extremely bright, so you're going to edit your images darker.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. And also, the way you set up your Photoshop, work environment, the
Wait, are you saying that black backgrounds are not the way to go in Photoshop? I'm kidding.
For print, no way.
Not for print.
Not for print.
Looks great on 500px though.
Yes. On web, as we said, there's different workflows for web and there's different workflows for print.
Yeah.
So that'd be the number one thing. And then the number two thing is over sharpening, just too aggressive or too large of a radius, using the defaults and just say, well, that was the default, and those, you got to remember, those defaults were formulated back when Camera Raw came out, and they had a 3 megapixel Canon, EOS, 30D with, very, very heavy anti-aliasing filters over it that blurred the crap out of it. And, now we've got extremely small pixels with no anti-aliasing filters, and, your the radius you want to use, because the radius is trying to remove the blur. And the radius that you're going to use and the exact settings are very, very different.
Yeah.
I have a super simple take-home tip for a lot of people that is awesome. If you're not going to make your own more intelligent custom preset in Lightroom or Camera Raw or whatever raw converter you use, and you're going to just use that image that first comes up, still go in there, turn off the sharpening, and turn on the remove chromatic aberration checkbox. Why those two things are not done already defies my understanding. And that is one of the things that, even if you're not going to make a couple more intelligent tweaks to make your image a little bit better right off the bat, turn that off. And that's I think is also one of the biggest things. Is I get these images from people and they say, hey, what do you think? Can I make a 50-inch, 80-inch, 60-inch, 40-inch print out of this? I know that I see this artifacting in there, and I know exactly what it is. About maybe 75% of the time, it's just that they didn't even know that thing was on, or they thought that was just for like general sharpening purposes. They didn't know how to mask it in or out. So just turn that thing off. Yep.
One of the most, useful things to learn is just how to mask out some sharpening, and to decrease that radius a little bit. Because oftentimes it's just set too strong, mask some out so you're not sharpening the noise in the sky, and that alone increases the quality of every single image pretty much. That's one of the first things I do to every single raw file. Let's go in and tweak that sharpening. Well, guys, where can people find the information about the workshop you guys are doing?
It's at markmetternich.com, METTERNICH.com. And right there under workshops, we have an interactive brochure that's really beautiful, and you'll get the gist of it. And most people see it, they're like, well, it's Robert standing next to 100 and something inch New York shot that he made with the D800 or something, and you can stick your nose on it or magnifying glass, and you can read the license plates in the cars off this thing. So I think it's a attention getter, because we take people to the galleries in Vegas and they get to see some of these things, and what they can look like if people implement the stuff that we're talking about. So, but anyways, that's where they probably could go. Yeah. Or my YouTube channel, I do talk quite a bit about the workshop.
And if somebody wants to order one of these Lumachrome prints, Robert, where can people find that stuff?
That's on our website, and that would be nevadaartprinters.com. And all of the info is there. And we have a basic online, order form where you can just put your info in and send a file to us, and we'll look at it for you. And there's no charge for that, so we don't charge you until we've looked at your file and discussed it with you, make sure that it's going to get what you want. I really hadn't mentioned, but we are a custom lab. We're not a high volume, big box, just crank it out, run and gun You know, it came in, hit print, and it goes out. Everything is looked at by somebody. Most of the large prints that's come across my desk, and if someone requests, you know, custom work, it comes across my desk, and I hand touch everyone and prep them. So it's a totally different experience from, you know, the fully automated places that you've gone to, but it's what the true traditional custom labs used to be.
Very cool. And I know a lot of people that have gone through you, and they all speak very, very highly. And so when I come down to Vegas next month, I want to come at the very least and check out some of these big Lumachomes for myself and see them in person.
Sounds
Cool.
like a plan. We'll have a good time.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on, and thank you guys for tuning in this week. And we'll see you all next time. Take it easy, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick.